Hey there, so today's brief tutorial is just regarding music analysis, and in front of you here I'm just trying to fire up our little template that we've done. So I have showed you this before, but if you've never seen it, what we've basically got on the left hand side is our musical elements. So therefore our instrumentation, harmony, melody, duration, texture, structure, and dynamics and timbre, and these are all taken from our Dr. Smith musical elements list, and probably they're not in the right order, but basically cover everything anyway. I've got two more columns, one on the left and the right here. One is for our song A, which in this case is the Sister Nancy song Bam Bam, and on the right here we've got our song B, which in this case we're looking at Get Up Stand Up by Bob Marley and the Wailers. So what I've done is, in the other window here I've got open the two songs, Bam Bam and Bob Marley's Get Up Stand Up, and as I listen through the song, basically what I try to do to begin with, as I play it through for the first time, is list the instruments that are here in the piece of music. So for the song A, I've gone through and talked about the vocals, saxophone, trumpet, electric guitar, so I'll just push play on that. So, go through and listen to it. It's a really easy one to fill in, and basically by listing the instruments, it helps me then to go on through the rest of the musical analysis. So a really important note about musical analysis: when you're creating an analysis of any song, is to base every judgment you make off the music from a standpoint of an instrument. So if I'm talking here, the first thing I've listed here when I talk about harmony, I look at chord progressions. I talk about a simple chord progression. It's harmonized on C and B flat. I've gone and worked that on the guitar, and it's played by the trumpet and the saxophone. So I've listened to the trumpet and saxophone, listened to the notes they're playing, and kind of found that they've harmonized the chords C and B flat. And then I've also linked that to some sort of structure, which is kind of the next thing that I do. So the first thing I list is instrumentation. I talk about the instruments that are here in the piece. The next thing I do is scroll down a little bit and start to fill in the structure. So the second listen of the piece, I then list what I hear for each particular section. So you can either do what I've done here and list it in terms of verse choruses, or you can look at A, B's. Sometimes you've got A1 sections and B sections and A2 sections. A1 and A2 being kind of the same but slightly different. And then I look at instrumentation and how that comes in and out for each of those sections. So by having listed the instruments, I'll know exactly what I'm listening for when I listen through the sections in both songs. And then by having listed down the structure of the piece of music, I can then be really specific about where the instruments are playing chords, where they're playing ostinatos, riffs, how they're working with one another, and then I can be really specific in my explanation about what's happening. So for this piece I've gone kind of not too specific. I've just looked at where there are major changes, like for example drums and bass coming in and out, or in some cases here the guitar and bass, I've said in the Bob Marley song here, play the unison melody, or I talk about a riff on the guitar or behind the verse. But if it's the same, I just list the fact that it's the same, or there might be slight differences. Basically anything you think you can take away and build on. And then I've put down in here, this is really important too, I'd say for every one of these musical elements, it's really important to think about a judgment or viewpoint. So I've sort of said it seems like the instruments come in and out when they feel like it in the Sister Nancy piece. And I've said for the Bob Marley one, in comparison, it actually feels like the piece is really formally structured when I listen to it, just as a judgment. And it's just simply my own perspective on how that sounds. I've then gone and talked about each of the other elements after that. So I've looked at harmony, like I was saying before, and talked about chord progressions. Talked about the tonality in terms of its key for the piece of music, whether it's a major or minor key. I've talked if there's any drones or really particularly different harmonic movement in this piece. I've then talked about melody, and by melody I've listed a few things here. such as shape, scale, or modes, any riffs or melodic passages, or even the counter melodies and harmonies, like vocal harmonies or instrumental harmonies. Although it kind of links between the two, I think it is fairly closely related to melody in the most part. And I haven't been too descriptive about it. I've just simply stated what I think I'm hearing, and it kind of assists when I'm kind of unpacking the piece of music. I'm not trying to be too fancy with my language, and I think later on down the track, when you come to edit it and think about how that is inserted into the essay, then try and think about musical language to better explain it. But at this stage, it's really good just to get your ideas down. With the duration section, I've looked at things like syncopation, rhythmic ostinatos, time signature, polyrhythms, the tempo of the piece. And in that, I haven't said andante, I haven't said, like moderato. I've just sort of, in my own words, just explained what I think it is. Like I said, this is something I can go through later and have a look for the real, proper language to help describe that. But for now, it's just, a really simple description of what I think it sounds like. Texture, I've then talked about whether I think it's like homophonic, monophonic, or polyphonic. In most cases, you'll find pop music as homophonic, meaning there's melody and accompaniment. But I have listed here that in both pieces, and part of the reggae style, I think, and the judgment that you can make at the end of it, is that both pieces are fairly sparse in terms of instrumentation and how they're all layered over the top of one another. It's really simple. Down the bottom here, I've then talked about some of the use of dynamics, and in some cases that's really evident, in some cases it's really subtle. But if you can make some judgments or some viewpoint on that, then that's awesome. The other thing I'll ask to here is just timbre. Timbre is often a really hard thing to describe, and a really hard thing to work around. If you wanted to, you could list all the instruments and then talk about how each of them sound in terms of on their own, or you can talk about how they work together and how they support one another in terms of timbre, or what sort of vibe or mood it creates for the piece of music. This last section here might really help when you're thickening out your assessment, trying to make your essay a bit more descriptive about what's happening in the piece. And the last thing I've said right down the bottom in this template is to try and find examples of the score. So one thing I do once I'm finished here, and I've started to fill in all the analysis, is to go through and start to either find Google score or Google image score examples, or try and transcribe things myself and sit on the piano and work them out, or use Sibelius or a handwritten sort of transcription. I mean, look, in this case, if you sometimes if you just search for, I've just gone and searched for the sheet music, and you can automatically see here there's a few that have come up under images. And then I guess basically you can have a look through and see what you can find that might be associated with the piece. Another really good one is obviously the piece that I've just looked at before. You can get all of the riffs and you can get all the sheet music that you can copy and paste into your assignment. Another thing you can try searching for is you could try something like that, and it'll give me a bit of an example of what offbeats look like, or some figures that I could possibly use in my assignment to help explain what I'm doing. There's a few different varieties of things you could do, but you just need to be a bit creative in your search. The other thing that might help too is Google Scholar, if you wanted to find research to help support what you're trying to say, but we'll have a look at that in another tutorial. And then once that's all filled in, then it's just a matter of sitting down and trying to put it all together into an assignment to make sense of that and to structure it. And that's another thing. I think if you have a look on the other tutorial on how to structure your essay and how to put it together, there'll be a bit more of an explanation on how to do that there. Okay, cool.